Today we're standing in a famine graveyard, and I can feel the souls of our ancestors and see the fear reflected in their eyes, in the eyes and the stares of young children in our world today who are not sure what's going to happen. The difference between An Gorta Mór and what we're facing today is that we know what is happening and we know what we can do to save it. The lives of millions of people are in our hands and in the actions that we're going to take, because we have the power to plant seeds and call for change.
We're standing here in the famine graveyard in Dunshaughlin, County Meath. I find it an extraordinary place. There's something about it that's very profound and very moving. There's also a sense of something sacred about the place. I'm sure that is because of the fact that many hundreds at least of people are buried here because they died during An Gorta Mór. And we're about 500 yards away from the old workhouse, which is still standing. There's a really striking contrast between the power that's represented by the workhouse and the weak people, the people who couldn't survive An Gorta Mór, are buried in this plot, hidden away at the back of the workhouse. It's overgrown, and in one sense you could say that it's neglected, but in another sense I feel it's somehow appropriate, that it really is a place rich in biodiversity. Like, nature is thriving here, and maybe that's a fitting tribute to the people who are buried below, under our feet. A place that is associated with death and desolation and the darkest period in our history is now a symbol of growth, life, and of nature blossoming through. There are famine graveyards all over Ireland, and maybe this is something that could be thought about, that they would be places of biodiversity, a place for many species to live. The lesson we can learn from An Gorta Mór is that the Irish poor, even though there were at least 2,000 varieties of potatoes, they had become dependent on one, the lumper potato. And when the blight struck, then it was wiped out entirely, and 1 million people died and 1.5 million were forced to emigrate. So there's an important lesson in the dangers of monoculturalism. We need biodiversity today as we needed it then, and we know what the consequences of losing that biodiversity is. Now we're handing control of our food over to corporations more and more. Seeds are being patented and owned by large corporations. We must wake up to this reality and reclaim control over the food we eat and the seeds from which that food grows.
I think there's been an awakening to biodiversity over the last few years, and indeed the COVID crisis and the lockdown many of us experienced actually gave us a bit more time to appreciate nature around us, and therefore of wildness to help that to thrive. We're in a beautifully wild place here in Dunshaughlin at the moment that's been let go this way, but now we're seeing places like everything from Trinity College letting its front gardens go wild, and county councils and city councils are beginning slowly to respond to a public demand for this and letting parts of their public parks go wild. It's to make sure you go and talk to your local council to see that they're doing that, and indeed to ask them to not use Roundup or other chemicals to bleach the countryside and the parks that they look after. Having rediscovered nature in a way, reconnected with nature, that we don't lose that as the world hopefully returns to a bit more activity and normality over the next while, that we keep the best of what we've reconnected with. Let areas go wild and stay connected with nature, which we depend on so much.
Climate change is something that will affect millions of people who are already burdened by unprecedented challenges, who already face poverty and famine, and especially my generation who are coming into this new world where we're not sure what's going to happen. It's much more than the melting of ice caps and the rising of the sea levels, because it's going to affect millions and millions of people. We might not see the exact effects of climate change in our world, but there's thousands of people whose homes and lives will be destroyed by the consequences of climate change, by our greed and our apathy. We need to call for climate justice so we don't repeat the mistakes that we've already made.
So it's only 5 months out of the 12 months that they can easily access water from this area. In a time when there's no rain, she says that they have to follow the river down the stream so that they should be able to dig like that and get the water. You can imagine for her to fill a bucket, or to be able to get enough water for her household, that is a lot of work. It's not only her household that is doing this. So her whole village is doing that at this area of the river because of the effects of climate change. Just last week, the water in this river were reaching up to that height. I could say about 3 meters or so. But then a week after, now we don't even have water in this river because of climate change. We're simply having rain come in at once, and then we get some flash floods and all the water goes, and they're not really benefiting. And now it's getting worse. For me as an activist and for the communities of Malawi, it would only be fair or a just system if those countries could consider their decisions and be more thoughtful of what they're doing, not only for selfish reasons, but also for the global good, and to be able to say that our actions have for a long time been affecting countries that are not responsible for climate change.
Heather hits the nail on the head about the complete injustice of climate change. Those who have done least to cause climate change are suffering the most because of its impacts. Developed nations bear most responsibility for causing climate change.
But we'll all be hit one way or the other by climate change and indeed by the biodiversity crisis if we don't act now. And there's amazing initiatives now which Friends of the Earth have been involved with in helping schools to put solar panels on their roofs. And we hope we're winning the battle, which is not that we should put solar panels on every school in the country, but that the government will make it easy and make it the thing to be done over the next 5 years to make every school in Ireland a solar school. We need to engage with decision makers in Ireland and indeed beyond to make sure they know we want to see sustained, serious action to reduce emissions, because as individuals there's only so much we can do ourselves. We can't change our energy system away from coal or peat. That involves government decisions. We can't make sure it's safe to cycle and walk to school. We need the government to invest in cycling and walking. And we can't make it easy for people to change their houses to warmer houses that use less energy. We need people to help us make those decisions and to guide us through that, and indeed to support us financially, particularly households that are at risk of fuel poverty or in low-income households. So the government is our collective will as a society. We need the government and the state to do more and to keep doing more to reduce our carbon emissions and to make it easy for all of us to choose less polluting options.
We're coming out, hopefully, of a pandemic that has caused us all to pause and think about the way we're living, including our food supply, where that comes from, and its security, or more important, its insecurity. We're depending on a very fragile food system that can break down at any time when struck by an unexpected event like this pandemic. So really the lesson is that we need to become more independent, more self-sufficient, growing our own food, buying from local producers, supporting local producers, who is maintaining an essential service and preserving a tradition that has gone back to the beginning of time.
In the climate context, Ireland's going to have to re-examine its farming system and its land use system in order to reduce our emissions. Farming won't have to reduce its emissions as much or as fast as other sectors, but if we're going to get to net zero pollution by 2050 and cut our emissions in half by 2030, every sector is going to have to do a lot more than it's doing now. So while it re-examines that, and maybe re-examines its intensification of dairy and beef and its export-dependent model for income, I think maybe it is a chance for farmers and for the rest of us to think about where our food comes from, what we're prepared to pay for our food. Because of course, if we're going to ask Irish farmers to grow more of the food we eat, we're going to have to be prepared to pay appropriately for it, and make sure, of course, that not all the profits go to supermarkets, but that they actually go to the people whose labour and whose love of the land is essential to our food system. That's farmers here in Ireland and, of course, around the world.
Young people, this is our chance. We can't wait for 30 years to look back on our mistakes. It's now. We need all of us to stand together and inspire each other for the change and for the prosper of our earth. It's changes in our everyday lives that can make a difference. In school, we can do simple things, like let our gardens grow wild and encourage the environment to grow. We need to learn from each other and listen to each other, and listen to our earth as it calls for us and tells us that it needs our help. Chicken wing, onion ring, curry sauce on everything, chip dip, egg flip, pumpkin seed, and apple pip. Meat, sweet, sugar beet, can you hear the sugar beat? In the beat box, cereal box, booze on the rocks, in the ice box, iced tea, wake on up and smell the coffee. Fish soup, spaghetti hoop, watermelon, cantaloupe, Sunday roast, cheese on toast, eating, feeding, coast to coast. Deep fry, shepherd's pie, reach up for that pie in the sky. Chocolate muffin, turkey stuffin', shovel it down, can't get enoughin'. Fill the space, fill the gap, fill the void when life feels crap. More and more, wondering why and what's it for. Feed the rich, starve the poor. Some get less, and some get more. Feed the rich, starve the poor, then go off and start a war, 'cause some just want more and more and more. Don't know what the hell it's for, but just keep grabbing more and more, more and more, more and more.